There is a Dogecoin and a Shiba Inu coin. But when will we get violent werewolf coin? I want some crypto that can really break me, not the supposedly true and new ones I have in my portfolio right now. Now let's get on with the werewolf stories. I moved away to go to college in the city. I lived on campus because that was what the school required at the time. On campus, it was against the rules to smoke devil's lettuce. So, we often went for rides at night in his old Nissan. We would always take these old back roads that were a few miles from campus. There was a place on these back roads where there was only one street light. It had an eerie orange glow, and it was the only street light we could find, as if it was the only one that had been put in and then forgotten, which was kind of creepy. Yeah, but it was a great place to hang out and smoke. Caleb and I would sit there for hours telling each other stories about our childhoods or jobs. I didn't have many work stories because I'd only ever had one job, which was at Starbucks, where I worked at the time. I remember our first meeting like it was yesterday. Caleb asked me, "Bro, what was the craziest thing you ever ordered at Starbucks?" As he took another hit. "I've only been there for about 3 months," I said with a smile on my face as I shook my head. "Come on, you must have had at least one annoying order so far." He was adamant. I thought for a moment, but my thoughts were going only a quarter as fast. When something finally came to mind, it should have been. Well, there was this one drive-through order where a man asked for just 2 shots of espresso and 8 times as much whipped cream as usual. Caleb held in the smoke and looked at me with the biggest WTF face he could muster, like, what's the point of that? He was able to say, "I still don't know better." Caleb exhaled his breath and cleared his throat when the man came through. He was only wearing boxers. I can agree with that. I hate pants, man. They are annoying to take off and to put on. He gave me the signature, and I nodded my head as if to say, yes, I agree. When something startled us, I almost dropped the cig on the floor. Something big brushed up against the car, making it shake back and forth. I remember holding on to the seat with my free hand and staring at Caleb with wide eyes. We were quiet for a few seconds. We kind of just stood there and waited to see what would happen. Then we started looking in my side of the car's side and rear view mirrors. I saw a large, hairy black shape on the passenger side. It was rubbing its body roughly against the back fender well, or whatever you call that part of the car, right above the wheel, where the opening is. This creature was definitely big, easily as big as one of us, and obviously strong enough to move the car side to side. It made me think of the videos I've seen online of bears scratching their itchy spots by rubbing themselves against things. Caleb, dude, that's what I thought it was. A black bear is over here scratching his hip on the car. I told my friend next to me, "Stop joking, man, what is that?" I leaned over to look in the side mirror, but I didn't roll down the window. Caleb slowly got up from his seat to get a better view. "Of course I'm telling you, it's a black bear," he said. Caleb said, "Holy crap, dude, I've never been this close to a bear before. Think we should get in the car and leave?" I asked him. I don't know, maybe we should just wait and see what happens. I mean, we're hungry, so I don't think he wants to come in. I think he just has a rash." So, the two of us stood there and watched this black, hairy thing scratch itself. But do you know that animals sometimes take longer than usual to do normal things? You've probably seen a cat sneeze for a long time, like 5 minutes, or a dog scratch himself with his teeth for a long time, like 20 minutes. Well, that's kind of what happened to us. the supposed bear kept scratching himself in the car for the next 12 minutes. During that time, neither of us moved out of fear of waking up our guest. In reality, a bear would have been scared if he heard us and would have run away. But we were so scared and high on drugs that we really thought the bear was going to attack us and try to get in the car. After those long 12 minutes, something even stranger and more strange happened. The thing stood up on its two legs. Bears do stand on two legs, that's true. The thing's shape was what set it apart in this case. It stood up after that. This thing was thin and had a body with a lot of points and angles. Its body was only about a third as long as its legs, and at least one of its legs bent backwards. I believe they did. Even though they were covered in thick black fur, it was clear that they were long and muscled. Now, if I'm wrong, please tell me, but I don't think bear legs get that long. I looked up at the head, which at this point was about 7 feet high. This was well above the height of the car, but it was still low enough that I could see it through my window. I saw dark eyes and ears that stuck out. In fact, the orange light from the street light was the only way I could see the eyes. No matter what it was, it moved its right arm or leg up. I don't know what you would call it. It wasn't using it to stand, but it lifted its right upper limb and started chewing on the area around the elbow. A thing that made me think of how my old dog used to scratch his leg. Think about how a dog scratches itself by quickly biting down on the spot with tiny bites. That's what this thing was doing, except for the shape of its body. It made me think of a dog or a hound. There was a nose, and the ears seemed to be perky and pointy. I didn't look at Caleb, but his silence told me that he had seen this thing hold up. I don't even remember us taking a breath while we looked. In one quick move, the creature slapped its other arm onto the top of the car. It looked like it was using that arm to stay balanced and lean on the car. The movement from its fast scratching went through its body and into the claw on top of the car, which was now making the most annoying metallic sound, like nails on a chalkboard but worse. As soon as we heard it, we both put our hands over our ears to block it out. But Caleb made a scary mistake. When he put his hands over his ears, he automatically muttered a curse word. When he realized what he'd said, his eyes shot open wide. I was horrified as his face turned away from me and toward the window next to me. At the same time, I heard the creature's arm being chewed on and the roof being scratched. Both stood still. Something told me that I already knew what he was looking at through my window. I looked into Caleb's eyes, and as I turned, I didn't look away. But Caleb quickly shook his head as if to say, "Don't go back. Please don't look out the window. I've never been so afraid before. Should I listen to what my friend says, or should I see for myself what that thing is? Do I get a close look at this animal I've never seen or heard of?" Well, curiosity sure is a big deal. I stopped looking at Caleb and turned my head more slowly than I had ever done before. When I saw it, my heart stopped. The thing outside was hunched over, so its face and head were even with the window of the passenger seat. Its face was almost touching the window, and it was looking right at me. It was creepy to think that this thing had been looking at the back of my head before I turned around. It never turned to see if Caleb had made the noise. Instead, it held my attention. Then I knew, because I turned around to look at it. It had seen me move, so it was sure there were things in this car that had been watching it from where it was standing. It could no longer see the light from these streetlights, so its dark eyes looked more like black holes in its furry face. We looked at each other for a long time, until it sniffed the glass, seemed satisfied, and started to walk away across the road with long strides. This road was about 9.5 feet wide, and I'm sure I saw something walk across it in 2 steps as it left. Its long claws moved back and forth like a person's hands do when they walk, swinging in the opposite direction of the leg next to it. It was hard to believe that this thing was not human. Still, it moved like a person. From a distance, if you saw this thing in the woods, you might think it was a hunter or hiker, another person. But when you get close to it, you can see that it is tall, hairy, and angular. As soon as it got through the trees. Even though I hadn't said anything, Caleb jumped at the chance to drive and put his foot on the gas. He tore the tread off of their tires, sending them flying down the road away from the streetlight until the moon was the only light on the road. And no, the moon wasn't full. I remember that I checked it. Caleb and I sped back to campus that night under a crescent moon. We went back to our dorm, locked ourselves in our room, and talked about this thing all night. It was unlike anything we'd ever seen before, so we didn't know what it was or if it was even real. This one thing kept giving me bad dreams for weeks. But it made Caleb want to get out on those back roads even more. And for some reason, I let him talk me into it. Part 2 of Wolf on the Old Road by Camper. I finally got the courage to go back a few months after the first time. Then again, it might not have been courage but peer pressure, since Caleb never stopped asking, "Dude, will you please go back with me? We have to look at that thing once more." Even though I told him that I've been having nightmares ever since, he kept pushing and pushing. I finally gave in because Caleb was my only friend and I didn't know what a creature that big and that shape would do to a man if he went by himself. So, we kept going back to that same spot and smoking under the one streetlight. 1 week, 1 month, and 1 year went by. During that time, there were no more strange events. At that point, Caleb had given up hope of seeing it again. He thought it was just a strange chance meeting or a shared dream. I thought it really happened, and I didn't think people could share hallucinations. The next time we saw each other was about 2.5 years later, when we were driving through back roads in Caleb's car. This time, we weren't at the part of the road with the one street light. It was also a new moon night, so the only reliable source of light to see where we were going were the headlights. Caleb, who was speeding and risking getting a ticket, hadn't replaced his left headlight, which had burned out a month before, so it was hard to see as we went around the bends and bins with only one bright light to guide us. Because of this, Caleb almost didn't see it step right in front of us in the middle of the road. I remember that Caleb cursed as he hit the brakes hard. If I hadn't been buckled in, I might have flown through the windshield and landed right next to this thing on the road. When we stopped completely. At first, I could only see one leg, but as I looked closer, I could make out the whole shape of the thing, which was a shape I knew well and was very scary. I don't know if it was the same creature or another one of the same species, but it was definitely the same kind of thing we saw years ago. It was staring at us again, but this time it looked angry, as if it knew we almost hit it and did something new and worse because of that. Its lips started to curl up, showing me sharp teeth that looked like canines. Something about the way was strange. The headlight only lit up half of its face. I whispered to Caleb, "You need to keep going, because only half of the shark's teeth were reflecting the light from the car." "So, you want me to hit it?" He spoke up a bit too much. No. You'll have to go around it. We have to go home right away." He nodded. Just before Caleb got off the brake, we looked back at this animal. This strange animal in front of us ran away into the dark side of the road. But I knew it hadn't left because I could still hear its frantic, heavy footsteps on the left side of the car, in the dark part of the road where we couldn't see Caleb. I told him to step on the gas to get his attention. Even so, he wasn't paying attention. He looked scared, and his eyes darted back and forth quickly in the dark part of the road, as if he didn't know where Caleb was. He might have wanted to find it before burying it. No, he wasn't afraid of hitting the creature. He was more afraid to fly away because he didn't feel safe. Caleb was strange in that he was scared because he didn't know where the thing was. He would have been the kind of kid who knew the boogeyman was in his room but didn't want to scream or run to his parents until he saw where it was. I knew that kind of behavior would get us killed. It looks like I may have been right to trust my gut, because the footsteps outside stopped all of a sudden. We were quiet as we waited and listened for the thing. And I broke the silence by asking Caleb again and again to just take off and take us home. After all, he was the one who had wanted to come back out here in the first place. He was the one who seemed to want to see the thing over and over again. Still, he looked more scared than I did. Then the unthinkable happened. Caleb's back door handle moved up, and the door started to open. I yelled at him and turned my head toward the back seat, horrified that that thing might crawl into the car with us. Finally, Caleb paid attention. He woke up from his sleepwalking and hit the gas so hard that the back door of the car slammed shut. But you can bet I was checking the back seat to make sure we didn't bring anything in with us. Luckily, there was nothing in the seats, and the only thing on the floor was fast food bags. I thought it was over, but I was wrong. Caleb drove as fast as he could, which wasn't fast enough because he had to be careful with the bends and turns with only one headlight. The next time I turned to face him, I saw something out his window. It was a reflection of two black eyes made by the lights on the car stereo. We were being chased by that beast, and it was able to keep up with us. It was running on all fours in front of Caleb's door and staring at Kayla through the window. I tried to say something, but Caleb cut me off. Out of the corner of my eye, I can see it, camper. I can see it right there without any warning. He made a sharp left turn. Suddenly, there were two bumps as something fell and rolled under the car's wheels. At the same time, the eyes of the creature on the side of the car disappeared. Caleb ran over the thing, and the crazy kid didn't stop to see if it was dead or gone. He kept going down the road until the lights of the city came into view. When we got back to school, we ran back to the dorms as fast as we could. I had this creepy thought that that thing could keep up with the car, so if it had survived being run over and decided to keep following us, it could have been waiting for us to get out of the car. Luckily, that was just my fear talking. We got back inside, and when we did, we looked at each other in the dorm and just laughed. I just couldn't believe what just happened to us. Man, you completely ran it over. I knew that was the only thing I could think of to do at the time. If I had gone any faster, he said, we would have ended up on the side of the road or in a tree. Well, you were smart and quick, man, because that thing looked really crazy this time. Caleb asked, what do you think it was? I had just started to feel tired. After the first time something like this happened, we always asked each other the same question. I don't know because I didn't really have an answer, and I was about to say the same thing again, which is that I don't know. But before I could answer, Caleb said, there are no such things as werewolves. Right? That thing looked just like a werewolf, or a werewolf-like creature. I took a moment to look at Caleb. He told the truth. I looked down and wanted to tell him that he was right. I mean, it did look like a werewolf, but those are just stories, right? Mythical magical creatures don't exist. I mean, they can't exist, but there we were, barely getting away from a Caleb animal that looked just like one. I told you it was true. This time, I'm sure that was real. He quickly nodded his head to show that he agreed and was both excited and scared. I felt the same way. It was thrilling to get away from something dangerous, but it was also scary. We never saw it again, probably because we didn't want to. After that, Caleb was safe enough that he didn't want to see it again. Instead, he went online to feed his obsession. People are looking into stories and reports of creatures like werewolves. He was very interested in the Dogman, the Beast of Bray Road, and all that other stuff. I did something different. I didn't want to deal with it anymore, and I wanted to forget about it. Move on, and don't tell anyone my story. The mind of a person has a unique way of dealing with things that leave permanent scars. It keeps them fresh in your mind and makes sure you can remember them well. So this is something I have never forgotten. At this point, the only thing that makes me feel better about it is telling people about it in person. Most people do not believe. Some people are excited and willing to believe you, which makes me feel a little less crazy and lets anyone else who has seen a dog man or a werewolf know that you're not alone. There are strange things in the world that shouldn't be there. We moved from the bar to the hallway. About 15 years ago, when I was 7 and my brother Brandon was 5, this happened. Brandon hadn't been afraid of the dark before. He didn't get scared when he saw scary movies. I had tried 1,000 times to scare him by hiding around a corner and jumping out when he walked by, but it never worked. Even when I did it, he would laugh. Brandon was weird, and he didn't seem scared at all. We left the city earlier that year and moved to the country. Dad bought us a nice, cozy house in the middle of the country, in an area with rolling hills. He made a living trading stocks by doing business, making phone calls, using the internet, and making occasional trips back to the city. At that age, I didn't understand anything about his job, but I was glad we could move to a much bigger and more open place. Brandon and I love being outside when the grass turns yellow and gets crunchy in the fall. I loved going down hills on my stomach and hearing the grass break under me. Mom didn't like it when I came back inside covered in dead grass, though. Brandon liked to climb up into trees. Another thing he did that I wasn't brave enough to do. I was afraid I would fall if I tried to climb something too high, so I just kept an eye on him to make sure he didn't. The first few months in the new home were lovely. Then winter came, and everything changed. When winter came, my brother Brandon started acting strangely. He would wake up tired in the mornings, when he would usually be wide awake and ready to go. I saw that he tried to stay close to the house. Our trips to the tree line to watch him climb trees came to an end all of a sudden. I guessed that he no longer liked climbing. I noticed that he hated going to bed and that he started to be afraid of the dark and night. I didn't know for sure which was which. It broke my heart to see how quickly my brother, who had always been so brave, active, and happy, turned into such a shy and quiet person. The boy who used to love adventures started to be afraid of them. As winter went on and on, I saw his health get worse. My parents were worried about him and tried to change his diet because they thought he wasn't getting enough vitamin D. Or calcium or something. His doctor visits and blood tests showed that he was physically fine. So my brother was thinking about something. I'd keep asking him, "Brandon, what's wrong? You don't want to climb trees, do you?" And all he could do was shake his head. I remember asking you if you were afraid of anything. He gave a little nod. "What is it, then?" But he would just shake his head and not say anything else. In this time frame, Brandon and I asked our parents if we could switch rooms. This was my idea, and I'd had it for a while because I didn't like where my room was. It was farther from the bathroom he and I shared, and I had to go to the bathroom more often than he did. Also, all I could see from my window was a big empty field and clouds. I think that would be fun for a lot of people. But if I could choose, I'd rather look at the trees. This was the direction Brandon's room faced. "Yes," my mom said, "but only if you and your brother both agreed." "Okay, I'm ready." I nodded and ran over to Brandon, who was on the couch watching TV. "Hey, Mom told us that we could switch rooms. Do you want to? At least give it a try for a while." His face went from being bored to being worried and even surprised. He shook his head and then looked like he stopped to think. Then he slowly started to nod his head. "Yeah. Sure, that's fine." He said I was great. I ran to tell my mom, who turned around and looked at Brandon on the couch. "Okay, you can switch rooms, but don't move any big pieces of furniture. Okay?" Sheets and blankets can be switched. Just don't switch the bed as a whole. All right? I told her, and then I went and got Brandon. Together, we went to our rooms and swapped some small things. But Brandon looked sad the whole time, as if he was sorry he had made that choice. I asked him more than once, "Are you sure that you want to change?" But he was still sure that he did. In fact, I knew he was happy with the change because he went to bed early that night. After a couple of hours of playing with cars and army men in his new room, he was almost happy to go to sleep. My parents told me it was time for me to go to sleep, too. So I went first down the hall and quietly looked into either Brandon's new room or my old room. He was sleeping in bed and snoring, and I was glad to see that he was getting some rest. He might be more himself in the morning. I'm glad I switched things up with him. I went to his room, which was now my room. I turned on the nightlight and then went to bed. I rolled over onto my left side and kind of just looked out the window at the time, trying to get a feel for my new view. My room and Brandon's room didn't have curtains or blinds on the windows. Mom tried to put curtains and blinds on our windows, but I told her I wanted to see outside. She told me I could just open the curtains and blinds if I wanted to see outside. I refused and said no, I always want to see them. Brandon, who is my younger brother, agreed, saying that the way I do it is the way he wants to do it. So that night, there were no blinds or curtains in the boys' rooms. Outside, there was enough moonlight that the tree line wasn't just dark. I could see tree branches and leaves moving in the wind. I just looked out at the trees at night until I fell asleep for a while. I remember getting out of bed on my back. It was still about 3 in the morning. One of my parents must have turned off my nightlight when they came into my room because it was off at the time. They did that often to save money on the electric bill. Luckily, I didn't wake up in total darkness because, as I said, the light from outside was just bright enough for me to see things in my room and outside. So I rolled back onto my left side, which is my favorite way to sleep. And I was about to close my eyes when I looked out the window again. There was more than just a tree line outside, because something was standing at the window and looking in. I couldn't breathe because it was so strange and shocking. It made my eyes and mouth widen, and when I looked at it, it looked back at me. It looked like a dog, but it was very tall, and its front 2 paws were on the glass. The paws looked like hands, but their nails looked like claws. I saw a dark grey covering, a long snout, and a shiny black tip at the end. Nose. It looked at me for a while before it started to move. I saw its paws move toward the edges of the window sill and trace them, as if feeling for something. Then its hands stopped at the bottom, and it pulled up hard. I heard the window shake, and I realized in sheer terror that it was trying to open my window. I didn't scream, but I wanted to jump up and run to my parents' room. I couldn't do it. All I could do was lie there, unable to move, and watch this thing try to open a window. It messed with the window from the outside for a few minutes, and I was glad when it finally gave up with a loud huff. It turned and walked away, which made me even more scared. I could hear its heavy footsteps as it walked like a person, one leg at a time, making it sound like it was much heavier than my dad. When the creature finally left and I could no longer hear its steps, I jumped out of bed and ran to Brandon's room. I tried to keep my mouth shut, but I was scared. I once opened his door and crawled under his blanket to sleep next to him. When I turned around to face him, I was surprised to see that he was wide awake and crying. Before I could say anything, Brandon kept telling me the same thing. I apologize, apologize, apologize. I didn't understand. I didn't get it at first, but then I figured out why he was sorry for the sudden change. Things scared him all of a sudden. Since winter started, this thing had been coming to Brandon's window. I finally got it. He felt bad. He didn't want me to go to his room at first. But I think the thought of sleeping better and not being scared must have gotten to him. I had nothing against him. I knew right away that he wasn't out to hurt me. I looked him in the eyes and told him it was all right. "Why didn't you say anything?" And all he could say was that he cried because he was scared. When morning came, nothing else happened. But now that my brother and I were both involved, we had to do something to stop it. I knew they wouldn't take us seriously. If we just told them what we saw, they'd think it was a dream. Brandon and I had seen the same thing, but that didn't matter. If it wasn't a nightmare, it would just be kids playing. I had a plan, though. You see, my dad hated spiders very much. Before my parents went to bed the next night, I found the biggest spiders I could find and kept them in jars all day. When it was time to go to bed that night, I put them in my parents' bed. Don't worry, they weren't the kind of snakes that could hurt people. I made sure one of them was on my dad and poked him to get him to wake up and look at it. He screamed, and I don't know how I got out of the room without him noticing. After my dad got rid of the spiders in the bed, he told my mom that he wasn't going to sleep there that night. He took a blanket and sat down on the sofa. I felt pretty bad about it, but that was part 2 of my plan, and the spider was just another part of that. I waited about 10 or 15 minutes to make sure he was asleep. Then, as I was about to poke him, I put the last one I had right on his face. He was already waking up because the spider's legs were tickling him. I ran to my room and waited. Then, just as he said he would, he screamed again. That poor spider probably had to die, but it was necessary so that my brother and I could get out of this situation. Before long, Dad was walking down the hall and heading for my room. He opened the door, looked to see if I was awake, and then sat on the bed because I was pretending to be asleep. When I opened my eyes, he said, "Hey, little guy, you want to go sleep with your brother, and I'll sleep in here." Even though he didn't try to explain anything, I just nodded and went to Brandon's room. As I said before, Brandon's room is closer to the bathroom and the rest of the house, so it was the first room my dad would go to when he came to check on the kids. He was also the one from whom I got my overactive bladder. So he would pick this room first. I walked down the hall to Brandon's room, where he was awake and waiting for me. I walked in happy and excited and told them it worked. We went to bed and waited under the covers. We must have fallen asleep while waiting, because when we woke up, my mom and dad were quietly picking us up and carrying us, tired and groggy, to the car. I looked around. They were walking quickly, and when we got to the car, it was full of bags. Dad had his gun and holster on, and I remember that when he put us in the car and started to leave the house, he called someone. Now I understand. I think he was calling the Forest Service, Animal Control, or the police, or maybe all of them one at a time. I'm not sure because I fell back asleep in the car with Brandon. When we woke up later in a hotel, my brother and I asked our parents what was wrong and why we weren't at home. Even though we already knew why, our parents, being parents, lied and said there was a spider infestation. I felt bad about this. But I knew there was more when I looked at my dad. You wouldn't leave your house because of a few spiders, would you? No, my dad had seen something worse. Something that made him worry about the safety of his family. I knew then that he had definitely seen it. We moved in with my mom's parents, who are also our grandparents, until we could sell the house and buy a new one. Brandon was no longer forced to sleep in that room. After I moved out and became an adult, I went back to visit his parents every once in a while. One time, I just had to know. So I asked my dad why he woke us up in the middle of the night and moved us out of that house. I thought you were enjoying it. He leaned forward, but I spoke up before he could say anything. Don't tell me about spiders. I know that it wasn't just because of the spiders. He didn't seem to be going to say anything. So I kept pushing him. Dad, that thing that looked like a dog, but had two legs and tried to get in through the window was also there when you looked out the window. His eyes went wide. My mom's did, too. So I think my dad must have told my mom a long time ago, if my mom hadn't seen it herself. What gave you that information? He asked his father, who Brandon had been with the whole time. What do you think caused him to change so quickly? His face changed to show that he felt bad. No, I was afraid of that happening. I put two and two together, believe me. He used his hand to rub the inside of his mouth and shook his head. I'm so happy I got us out of there as soon as I could. I wish I had done that sooner. I knew that what we saw was real and that our little Home Alone style plan to get my dad to see it too had worked. I told my dad not to feel bad, but I think we're all scarred for life from living in that house, and to think what could have happened to Brandon if I hadn't switched rooms with Brandon. The Adirondack Mountains in Tomcaters. If you ever go to the Adirondack Mountains, be careful around Mount Gore because you never know what might be there. The mountains are nice to look at. Compared to the busy and noisy city, it's like a whole new world. So, when my great-aunt invited me to spend time with her, my great-uncle, and my second cousin, I think it was my second cousin. I don't know how family stuff works in the Adirondack Mountains in upstate New York, so I quickly said yes. The months went by, and soon it was time for me to go to where they lived. Flying out to the mountains. We finally got to a place called the Summit, which is a condo complex. It was near a small town called North Creek and had a view of the famous ski mountain Mount Gore. Well, it used to be that all you could see up here were for sale signs because the towns were slowly dying. I think that's because logging was a big business in the town in the 1800s. Anyway, we went to a restaurant with a great view of Lake George, where we could see boats and people parasailing over the calm water in the mountains, which formed a valley around the lake. I looked at a painting on the wall while we looked at the menu. It looked like it was a very old painting. If I had to guess, I would say that the people in the painting are from the 17th or 18th century. I thought they were gone. A child was running toward a house with a woman inside and what looked like an odd-looking person on all fours. I was interested in the painting, but in the end, it was just a painting. After a fun day, we went back to the condo at night. When we left, there were bags all over the place and food in the fridge. I spent a few hours watching TV, and scrolling through Twitter to see what stupid arguments people are having. It was close to 9 p.m. I had the windows open so I could see the stars by then. But it was cloudy, and the area was still beautiful. Everyone else was sleeping upstairs, so I was alone in the dark living room with just the TV. And street lights that brighten the area. I saw something that night. I was paying attention to the TV, so I didn't notice what was outside until it came into the light. On the other side of the narrow street was a condo next to a large forest. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a big dark mass step out of the trees. I looked over to see what it was as it slowly moved toward the edge of the light. When I saw what it was, I dropped my phone on the carpet floor. The thing was at least 7 feet tall and walked on 2 legs. Its body was like that of a bodybuilder, but its head was like that of a German shepherd, only bigger. It had thick, dark gray fur and a tail that was pretty long. It went to the condo across from us and sniffed around, but as far as I knew, no one was there. I waited for it to finish turning around so I could close the curtains, but I left a small gap in the curtains to make sure this thing didn't come toward our condo. It looked into the other condo, but in the end, it didn't care about it. Then it got down on all fours, which must have been about 4 feet high, and ran away shaking so fast that my jaw dropped. I quickly went upstairs after closing the curtains. I don't know how, but I fell asleep at some point. When morning came, I did my best to forget about what had happened, and I did. We were there for a total of 10 days, and my first night they gave me a bad impression of the place. But as more dull nights went by, the event became harder to remember. By the last night, 99, the day had been a lot of fun. We went to Lake George again, and took a steamboat ride. We walked around the lake and saw more beautiful sights. When we got back to the condo, I went to my room on the 2nd floor to relax. My room faces away from the mountain and into a thick forest. I was watching YouTube on my phone. The battery was low, so I plugged it into the charger that I had put on my nightstand. Most of the time, I left the windows open so I could get fresh air and hear the sounds of the night. Aside from that night, outside, there was no sound. Already, it was hard for me to sleep because I was used to the noise of cars, planes, dogs barking, and all sorts of other things. This surprised me because I had heard that when animals stop making noise, a predator is close by. I started to pay attention to every little sound. There were branches, leaves that were breaking, and something big was breaking under them. Then I hear something hit the ground in the forest. The sound was far away, but sounds from farther away were coming closer. By the second, I got out of bed and looked out at the dark forest in front of me. I looked to see if a bear was coming, but it wasn't at all a bear. Instead, I see a dog with an unusually big head peeking out from behind a tree. It was about 30 meters away and a few feet off the ground. The dog or wolf was sniffing the air with its back to me. Its pointy ear perked up, and it turned quickly to face me. The eyes were glowing yellow. I didn't know what was going on because there wasn't any light in the area where they were. As we both looked at each other, I started to feel bad. I turned my head down and out of sight to maybe show that I wasn't interested. After a while, I hear the crunch of leaves coming toward me. I huffed in anger and took another look outside. Now, that thing was about 20 meters away, and its eyes were about 7 to 8 feet off the ground. I could see part of its upper body and an arm that was now wrapped around the tree. It looked like it had a human hand, but it was gray, hairy, and had sharp nails. It growled and showed its sharp teeth. They looked like canine teeth, but they were longer and sharper. I fell to the floor quickly, started shaking, and my eyes filled with tears. I looked at a mirror that showed a lot of the tree line. I could see feet that looked like human feet and legs with joints that could bend backward. Next came the lower and upper torso. Then I could see it clearly. I watched it for a minute while I looked around our condo. It was the longest minute of my life. It grabbed a tree to help it stand up. As I cried, I did my best not to breathe out loud, but at one point I accidentally let out a scared gasp. I looked in the mirror, which is a mistake I still feel bad about. It was looking right at the mirror, right at me, with a big grin on its face. It went to the porch and started walking back and forth on it. I could feel every step as it tried to get in. God bless me, I shut the door. After a few minutes, it stopped caring and walked back into the woods, but it didn't forget to give me a smile as it left during the restless night. All I could hear were the cries and howls of animals that were in trouble. When the sun came up, I ran downstairs to make breakfast for everyone before we left. 2 hours later, we were all late and getting ready to leave. My cousin got his keys and some bags, and as he was walking to the door, I heard him say, "Hey, who left the door unlocked?" My face went white and my heart beat faster. Dire Lavender saw a werewolf in the Midwest. I grew up in the middle of the United States, in a small town surrounded by fields that only locals seemed to know about. I was in both drama club and academic bowl, so I thought it was great that the drama club teacher let us practice plays after we got back from academic meets. On the night this happened, drama club ended late. We wanted everything to go smoothly for the play at the end of the week. So, we stayed later than usual to make sure everything was just right. I lived about 15 miles outside of town, and since I couldn't drive yet, an older student named Kelsey, who lived a mile or two up the road from me, would often give me a ride home. It was a beautiful night. There were a few clouds that made it hard to see the stars, and the moon was almost full, giving off a soft light that lit up the countryside as it went by. We had just turned onto the gravel road, which put us halfway to my house, when I saw something big and white fly by my window. I jumped up in my seat and looked around. Kelsey noticed that I was acting strangely and asked what was going on as she looked out the windshield in the direction the blur was going. I said, "I just saw a huge thing start up outside the window." I pointed to the window on the passenger side. Kelsey said with a roll of her eyes that it was likely just an owl. "Yeah, sure." And now I knew that what I had seen was much bigger than any local bird. But I didn't say anything because I didn't want to sound like I was crazy. Instead, I looked for any sign of what I had seen. When Kelsey screamed, I stopped what I was doing and turned to see what was wrong. I saw it again. From behind us, we saw a flash of grey and white. When I looked ahead, I saw a big wolf not far ahead of us. Kelsey hit the brakes hard, but there wasn't enough room between us and what was coming. We were going to hit it, but then, to our horror, it stood up on its back legs. It reached out and grabbed the cattle guard on the front of the Jeep with its front paws. It went back about a foot or so before the car stopped. I stood still because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Where the creature should have stopped, there were hands with claws, and its chest was too big to be that of a normal wolf. It looked at Kelsey and then at me, and I'm sure I saw a smile. It let go of the cattle guard, leaving scratches in its wake, and walked around the Jeep on its back paws, sniffing around the vehicle as if it were a person. It stopped once at the back of the car and again when it got to my side. It looked in the window at us, then jumped. We heard it briefly land on top of the Jeep, then on the driver's side, and then it took off toward town. Kelsey and I looked at each other in complete shock. "Please tell me, Kelsey, that you saw what I saw." I knew that she also saw it. I just needed to hear it to know for sure that it was true. "If you're talking about the crazy werewolf." "No, you weren't the only one who did that." We got to my house and decided not to tell anyone because no one would have believed us anyway. But I've gained the courage to tell people to be careful over time. You never know when you might meet something that we've been taught should only exist in stories.